At 6:03 off the coast of the Caspian Sea, 120,000 barrels of daily output hung in the balance across 800 kilometers of hostile airspace. A single miscalculation would cost 38 minutes of undetected flight and leave 22 subsea wells feeding a shattered surface network. Failure meant not just one platform surviving, but an entire energy corridor remaining intact for months of uninterrupted extraction. A drone nose camera hovered mid-comparison between stored imagery and a steel silhouette rising from the waves. Before we dive in, comment where you are watching from and click subscribe. This moment matters because 12 lives were not at risk, but 120,000 barrels per day were, translating to over $4 million in daily revenue flowing into a war economy. Each second of delay extended that flow by 1,388 liters, while every kilometer flown reduced the margin for error by 0.00125%. The irreversible decision occurred when the electro-optical seeker disengaged GPS reliance at exactly 60 kilometers out, committing the warhead to visual alignment alone. Once that handover executed, no signal recall could alter impact geometry, and the physical alteration of the Vladimir Filanovsky platform became permanent the instant the first shaped charge breached metal. This event redefines offshore vulnerability because distance no longer guarantees protection when autonomy operates below detection thresholds in real time. The smallest detail begins with a 0.3 millimeter pixel in a nose-mounted sensor array capturing thermal contrast at 298 Kelvin against a 291 Kelvin sea surface. This sensor functions like a home security camera, distinguishing a person from a shadow, except it operates as an electro-optical terminal guidance unit, resolving structural edges at angular velocities under 0.02 degrees per second. Without this precision, target offset errors exceed 1.5 meters, causing warhead misplacement. With it, sub-centimeter accuracy persists through vibration and glare. You will notice the pixel grid stabilizing at 640 by 512 resolution as the drone crosses the 59.9 kilometer threshold. Contrast defines this layer: 298 Kelvin versus 291 Kelvin, high resolution versus motion blur, locked alignment versus drifting error. Expanding outward, the camera feeds into a navigation processor running reference matching algorithms against 14,736 stored image tiles. This processor acts like a librarian, recalling a specific page from a cataloged encyclopedia, except it executes pattern correlation across infrared, visible spectrum, and geometric datasets as a computational vision system. If this unit fails, the drone reverts to inertial drift. If it succeeds, sub-meter targeting endures jamming. You will notice the processor cycle count stabilize at 1.2 billion operations per second during terminal descent. Contrast persists: algorithmic success versus navigational collapse, real-time analysis versus cached obsolescence, active correction versus passive deviation. Next, the processor interfaces with a flight control computer managing actuator responses at 200 Hz. This computer resembles a household thermostat, adjusting heat based on sensor input, except it directs elevons, rudders, and throttle as an autopilot flight management unit. Failure here introduces oscillation. Functionality ensures trajectory integrity. You will notice the control loop latency hold at 5 milliseconds during final approach. Contrast marks this stage: stable damping versus divergent oscillation, commanded attitude versus uncorrected roll, precise descent versus uncontrolled drop. The flight computer receives data from a GPS receiver sampling satellite signals at 1 Hz. This receiver operates like a car navigation unit, plotting position from overhead beacons, except it decodes L1 and L5 bands as a global positioning system module. Inside a 200-kilometer jamming radius, coordinates smear by 2 meters initially, then 20, then 200. Without redundancy, drift accumulates with layering. Handover occurs before divergence. You will notice the signal-to-noise ratio collapse at 60 kilometers as electronic warfare saturates the band. Contrast defines exposure. Clean coordinates versus corrupted packets. Reliable triangulation versus ambiguous fixes. Navigable space versus signal void. This GPS unit connects to a Starlink terminal transmitting telemetry at 25 megabits per second. This terminal functions like a home internet dish, pulling streams from passing satellites, except it maintains links with 18 low Earth orbit nodes. As a satellite communication array, latency holds at 40 milliseconds, 65 times faster than geostationary relays orbiting at 36,000 kilometers. Jamming designed for fixed beacons fails against dispersed constellations. Conventional countermeasures target single azimuths, not dynamic skies. You will notice the uplink lock persists through 1,400 kilometers of electronic warfare. Contrast reveals asymmetry, 550 kilometers. Altitude versus 36,000. Mobile nodes versus stationary points. Resilient mesh versus vulnerable spokes. The Starlink terminal relays to a mission control van, housing telemetry displays refreshed every 4 seconds. This van operates like a remote workspace, monitoring home appliances via cloud feed, except it supervises autonomous flight parameters as a ground control station. The operator observes airspeed, altitude, navigation status, battery health across 12 units without touching controls for 90 minutes. Inaction risks mission drift. Oversight enables correction. You will notice the 12 green feeds remain nominal through corridor transit. Contrast underscores discipline. Passive monitoring versus active piloting. Real-time visibility versus blind flight. Sustained coherence versus cascading alerts. Each drone carries a flight computer preloaded with a navigation sequence encoding 9,400 waypoints. This sequence acts like a taxi driver memorizing every turn before departure, except it dictates altitude changes and course corrections as a pre-programmed routing protocol. Execution begins before propeller rotation. No mid-flight instruction is required. Without this, dependency on live signals grows. With it, autonomy endures silence. You will notice the waypoint counter decrements steadily from launch to 800 kilometers. Contrast clarifies resilience. Stored knowledge versus live dependency. Pre-execution versus reactive command. Uninterrupted cruise versus signal-dependent progress. The drones fly at 180 kilometers per hour, 50 meters above waterline, producing radar cross-sections akin to seabirds. This speed and altitude contrast with jets at 900 kilometers per hour and 10,000 meters, where military surveillance radar optimizes for velocity and metal mass. The radar processes returns using Doppler filtering, classifying slow propeller signatures as clutter. At 12 kilometers out, 4 minutes from impact, the operator sees nothing because the system excludes what it was designed to ignore. You will notice the radar scope remain clean despite 12 objects crossing the final approach corridor. Contrast exposes obsolescence. Fast metal versus slow composite. High altitude versus wave skimming flight. Detected threat versus filtered noise. Inside the platform, the main wellhead processing manifold collects flow from 22 subsea wells at 14,500 pounds per square inch. This manifold functions like a household plumbing junction, merging pipes from multiple taps, except it consolidates crude streams before separation as an upstream collection hub. The first drone strikes at 3:55, its shaped charge penetrating housing before detonation. Pressure collapses instantaneously across the network. you will notice the manifold breach occur in one frame of thermal data. Contrast marks destruction, intact convergence versus shattered junction, sustained pressure versus instantaneous drop, productive flow versus severed supply. Emergency shutdown systems activate within milliseconds, snapping 22 subsea safety valves closed. Each valve operates like a faucet turned off under pressure, except it isolates wells at seabed depths as a subsea isolation device. Closure completes in under 4 seconds across all units. Without this, uncontrolled release follows. With it, containment holds despite surface ruin. You will notice valve status indicators shift to sealed in synchronized sequence. Contrast defines response: rapid isolation versus runaway discharge, automated safety versus cascading failure, contained reservoirs versus exposed flow. The second drone impacts the primary separation module at 0355 and 3 seconds. This vessel functions like a kitchen strainer, dividing solids from liquids, except it splits crude gas and water at industrial scale as a downstream processing unit. Detonation breaches the shell, collapsing structural integrity. Downstream piping becomes inert conduit. You will notice the vessel deformation propagate in 0.1 second intervals. Contrast reveals fragility, functional division versus catastrophic rupture, exportable product versus useless stream, active processing versus dead infrastructure. The third drone strikes the power generation block at 3:55 and 7 seconds. Primary turbines cease. Emergency generators engage within 2 seconds. These generators operate like backup home power units during outages, except they supply critical systems on offshore installations as auxiliary power sources. They energize shutdown confirmations already executed. You will notice generator load registers climb to idle despite zero operational demand. Contrast exposes redundancy without purpose, active power versus idle supply, designed continuity versus fulfilled termination, energized circuits versus silent machinery. 11 seconds pass from first impact to final system confirmation. 3 drones, 3 targets, irreversible alteration. The next morning, production reads 0 barrels, not degraded, not impaired. 0. 22 wells remain intact on the seabed, reservoirs holding decades of potential, yet surface connectivity is gone. The manifold, separator, and power block are destroyed. Intact wells without surface processing yield nothing. You will notice the production counter freeze at 0 across all dashboards. Contrast defines outcome: subsurface abundance versus surface void, preserved resource versus unusable asset, potential output versus actual nullity. The Russian Defense Ministry reports intercepting 1 drone at 4:12, 12 launched, 11 impacted, 1 downed. The announcement omits platform status. The Caspian Pipeline Consortium revises loading schedules in silence for 4 days. Crude grades contracted to buyers vanish from terminal arrivals. Position tankers idle. Notifications cite operational disruption. Without restoration dates, you will notice shipment logs skip Filanovsky entries without explanation. Contrast exposes concealment, public claim versus operational, reality announced success versus unstated loss, scheduled flow versus interrupted delivery, replacing the manifold demands, specialized offshore components sourced across 6,200 kilometers. Transport requires heavy lift vessels, navigating Caspian shallows at 6 knots. Installation depends on restored power and pressure systems. Each phase spans weeks. Phases do not overlap. They follow sequence. Months accumulate. You will notice procurement timelines extend in discrete, non-parallel blocks. Contrast defines delay, sequential dependency versus parallel recovery, measured progress versus stalled revival, engineered repair versus temporal constraint, Back in the van at 4:52, the mission controller closes his screen. 12 telemetry feeds darken at impact confirmation. The Starlink terminal disassembles in 90 seconds. Antenna folds, cables coil, components bag separately. The vehicle moves before the final connector seats. No flight control input occurred in 90 minutes. Routes were preloaded, satellites held through jamming, cameras identified targets autonomously. You will notice the operational footprint vanish in under 2 minutes. Contrast marks precision, programmed execution versus manual intervention, sustained lock versus signal loss, completed mission versus lingering presence. 1,400 kilometers of Russian electronic warfare blanketed the corridor. GPS signals corrupted across 200 kilometers, jamming designed to defeat 2022 and 2023 drone fleets met a stacked solution. Layer 1 endured silence, Layer 2 pierced interference, Layer 3 bypassed signals entirely. You will notice the jamming effectiveness invert against layered autonomy. Contrast exposes evolution, single-point failure versus redundant coverage, legacy defeat versus adaptive penetration, anticipated threat versus unforeseen vector. Ukraine did not ascend the 1,400-kilometer barrier. It skimmed beneath at 50 meters, 180 kilometers per hour for 10 hours. Distance assumed armor, geography assumed safety, range assumed exclusion. The Caspian Sea was treated as domestic sanctuary. You will notice the flight path hugged the waterline in unbroken continuity. Contrast reveals miscalculation, vertical defense versus horizontal evasion, distant deterrence versus proximate intrusion, theoretical security versus physical breach. At 60 kilometers, cameras activated, stored photographs from space, matched real-time geometry. The platform occupied exactly the predicted coordinates, warheads aligned to exactly the required points. You will notice the seeker lock stabilize on structural signatures without deviation. Contrast confirms inevitability. Predicted position versus actual location, archived image versus live reality. Calculated impact versus executed strike. The control room screen showed nothing at 3:47. It showed nothing at 3:58 because destruction erased the subject of observation. Russia's Caspian revenue conduit ceased operation. Restoration spans months. The mechanism of interruption remains replicable. You will notice the final thermal signature dissipate into ambient sea temperature.